Hello again, I'm Stephen Jerome, and I'm going to continue reading from my third novel, The London Year. This is part 79. I have to say, if one is reading along with my reading, I don't expect anybody to be following every episode of this. I'm just keeping the ball in the air, you understand. But there's a two-page section now that I'm skipping over completely because it goes into matters that I can't talk about here, let's say. None of it is graphic salaciously. It's just descriptive and more than the powers that be apparently are able to tolerate. So anyway, we'll continue now with part 79. One day, Blanche's brother Timothy, the blonde charmer I met over Christmas, invited Blanche and Henry, Tess and me, to a fancy dress ball at his Oxford college. It meant I'd have to rent a tuxedo, a first in itself, but I wasn't going to miss an opportunity to experience Oxford from the student's level, not just as a tourist. That the whole thing came by way of Timothy was icing on the cake. He was coming with his girlfriend Angela, the unlikely mathematician. The plan was that we'd all stay a night at the comfortable home of a recently deceased former professor, John Thomas, with whom Timothy had been close for several years. Along with the old man's sister, Timothy was helping to sort out the house. When we arrived, the entire place was in an obvious state of dismantling, bookshelves half empty, boxes half filled, framed artwork and awards leaning in stacks against the wall. More boxes filled with kitchen items and sundry knickknacks were on other tables. But even in disarray, the house resonated with a warmth. When I asked Timothy about our deceased host, he spoke of him with great affection. Professor Thomas had taught 3 generations of Oxford's youthful best and brightest, frequently welcoming small groups into his airy sitting room to discuss literature, poetry, and music. He was a man ahead of his time, Timothy said, and from a time that will never come again. It was also English, revolving around an academic world I knew nothing about. But if only for a day or two, knowing my own school days were well and truly over, I could revel in imagining I was an Oxford student myself. In much later years, I had the same feeling staying several weeks as a guest of a fellow at the American Academy in Rome, imagining how it must have been if I'd done what it takes to actually get there. But I was never that guy. With permission from the surviving sister, we had the house to ourselves for the weekend. Timothy assigned the rooms. Blanche and Henry took upstairs bedrooms next to Timothy and Andrea, whose laughter I heard even through closed doors. Apparently he was still as amusing as he was when I first met him on Boxing Day. Tess and I were given a room on the ground floor that the professor himself had occupied after he could no longer manage the stairs. There was a bed facing the window, replacing a large desk that had been moved into the dining room. More boxes of books there, too. "We're just making do," Timothy said, but he was being modest. He'd prepared all the beds himself with fresh sheets and clean towels in both upstairs and downstairs bathrooms. Space was made for candles by the bed. In fact, there were 2 gracious hosts looking after us, one whose nurturing spirit, even after passing, gave us warmth and shelter, and Timothy Haddock himself, looking after the real-world amenities with his own preternatural charm. I was secretly thrilled and smitten all over again. At the appointed hour, we gathered for champagne in the sitting room before calling a taxi to take our first stop of the evening. Tess wore the low-cut, floor-length dress she had worn on New Year's Eve, her wonderfully ample breasts on rare and glorious display. Andrea was dressed in early Chanel, a black 3/4-length straight line with 3 tiers of long fringes all the way round. Blanche wore a simple black cocktail dress offset by a quietly spectacular choker borrowed from her actress sister, featuring a fan of 5 large rubies surrounded with diamonds. Henry was so tall and thin, and those pimples, I doubt if he ever found clothes that didn't seem to just hang on him. Timothy, on the other hand, was clearly born to wear tuxedos. I'd never seen anyone so elegant. But his way, the tousled hair, his easy gestures, beautiful voice, as well as an air of kindness, was really beginning to rattle me. After a very short taxi ride, we were dropped at a pub in the middle of town. It was probably a casual haunt, one of many, for Oxford's student population, but on this night it was crowded with young people all dressed up for the ball. I'd seen enough masterpiece theater programs on American television to give the whole scene context. Even Harrod's A Living Thing retained those echoes, but Oxford itself was like stepping into history, and a surprisingly well-preserved one at that. The old stone walls, ornate windows, heavy doors, even the college's empty courtyards still held the ghost of centuries shared on the lovely shoulders of youthful promise. As dusk turned to early evening, people started drifting out in animated little groups, and we more or less paraded casually through Oxford's timeless streets as everyone headed to the college. I don't remember which one, where the ball was being held. How grand we must have looked, and how proud I was, the only American, being welcomed to drink deeply, literally and figuratively, of this uniquely English way. I'm going to stop there, I think. There's a bit more to tell about the ball and what happened after when they got home, kind of funny. So let's just continue tomorrow, and I thank you again for following along. Bye-bye.